Welcome to the Renaissance and welcome to this edition of African Betrayal of Negroes, Part 2. Important notice: it is not our intention to offend anyone with this video. It is not also our intention to suggest, insinuate, or preach hate towards any group, race, tribe, or person. The goal of this video is for you to look for the books, journals, and other publications referenced and study them yourself. Remember, if the Negro in the ghetto must eternally be fed by the hand that pushes him into the ghetto, he will never become strong enough to get out of the ghetto. Carter G. Woodson. There is no propaganda in this video or any deliberate attempt to misinform anyone. Recall from part 1 of this series that we had a question around why the different ethnic groups and races in Africa did not come together to stop the slave trade. Remember, we tried to show you that the different ethnic groups and non-Negro races in Africa actually ganged up and still gang up against the Negroes and always taking sides with the slave masters. Remember also that we talked about why the slave masters and their allies are hell-bent on adopting the African appellation for the Negroes and always saying how it is one Africa, Africa is united and all that. Remember, the implication of that appellation is that when the non-Negroes kill the Negroes, they can easily cover it with Africans killed other Africans, the same way they did with the slave trade, where the non-Negroes captured and sold the Negroes. But today they say Africans sold other Africans. So a question came to us about how the whole of people like Nigerians were the same. So we need to just give a little clue to our listener who threw that question to understand that they are not the same, and there are very small units of Negroes within the larger groups, like the Northerners, where you have the Negroids and the Berbers. So we're going to do that by referencing one or two books before we delve into our topic for today. Let us then reference a book called History of Nigeria by A.C. Burns, and it was published 1919, and we see the following. The greater number of the pure Negro inhabitants of Nigeria are pagans, while among the Negroid and Berber tribes of the north, the majority are Mohammedans. Christianity has made but slow progress in the country, save in the comparatively few localities where missionaries have worked for long periods. Now we need to understand first that the people did not accept Christianity or Islam. It was imposed. They were done through war, both Christianity and Islam. Because remember, the Negro religion was pure worship of the creator of heaven and earth, in accordance with his word. Practically what you see in the Bible. The only difference was that they didn't have it written down. So if you noticed the religions you have, their books are saying something totally different from what they do. Totally. Because most of what they do are not in the Bible. But in order not to digress, you have seen that they tell us about the Negroid and Berber race in the north. So they are different. And there is no way they can come together because the Negroid and Berber groups always take sides with the slave masters. And that is what you see. There is no way they could have come together when they were aiding it. They were part of it. They were the ones capturing the slaves. And that is why the slave master, taking their own side as well, is hell-bent on the African appellation, thereby making the Negroes and Negroid and Berbers and everyone that captured and sold them to be the same with them. So when they do their killing, because they are more violent than the Negroes, when they do their killings, it will be these people are barbaric. The slave master will use their propaganda channels to say it is Africans doing it, but they are actually targeting the Negroes in whatever they are saying. If we also reference Nigerian studies or the religious and political system of the Yoruba by R.E. Dennett, and it was published in 1910, we see the following. The Iba, a fine race of agriculturists, declare that they are quite independent, as also do the Ijebu, Ilesha, Ife, and Iketu, now in French territory. From 1840 to 1886, when the British government intervened as peacemaker, wars between these parts of the Yoruba people were constant. From that date until 1892, the peacemaker has had to punish the Ijebu and Eba for closing their trade routes. So now, normally what the slave master will do is to come in and create chaos and claim to be making the peace. That's normally what they do, because records show that all these people were living in peace prior to the Europeans coming. However, our interest here is where it says that they were declared that they are quite independent. They were not Yorubas, so to speak, but they were Negroes, or they could be Negroes. Our interest is that it had been shown somewhere that the Yorubas were Negroid, but there are Negro groups there. Remember, the Negroes are scattered all over and they are being pursued by these non-Negroes. It might look like that's not what is happening, but if you are a scholar and you do some research, do some digging, research beyond the surface, research beyond a platform given to you by the slave masters, like telling you which religion was what, just do your own independent research, you will discover what we're talking about. But let us move forward. At least if you look on top of the highlighted portion, you're going to see where it says Ilorin had been lost to the Alafin and is now inhabited by a mixture of Hausa, Fula, and Yoruba. So that should tell you that that's how those mixtures happen. There were some mixtures before the coming of the invaders, which are predominantly the non-Negroes, including the Yorubas to an extent, because you may begin to ask yourself why the Yorubas are not interested in their brothers that are outside Nigeria. That's because they are part of the conquest. That's why. So they don't want to talk about those their brothers. They keep them there while trying to help the slave masters complete his conquest of the Negroes to the ocean. That's actually what they are doing. It might look like something different on the surface, but that's just what their game is if you do some research about the history of these whole places. So from the opposite page, we see that the colony of Lagos in 1863 rejoiced in a separate government, but in 1866, with the other West Coast settlements, it was attached to Sierra Leone. In 1874, after the Ashanti War, Lagos became part of the new Gold Coast colony, and in 1886, it became a distant crown colony, since when its progress has been phenomenal. Now remember, with Lagos being part of the Gold colony, the slave port that is in Badagry will technically now be outside the slave coast and be like in the Gold Coast. So these are part of their diversions. They try to divert your attention. Remember, we told you that the slaves sold from Elmina and all those places are not from Ghana. They couldn't have been, and we're going to show you also. The problem is that place was just a slave holding facility. This is like a warehouse. So when you ship a product, let's say to the UK, and you land it in their port, it does not mean the goods were manufactured there. That's how you have to say it. It's very simple. If you look at the number of villages they destroyed to capture the slaves, that should tell you that it's impossible for the slaves to have been captured from near where the slaveholding facility could be. It will also explain to you why they all gang up against the Negroes. Like, if you were to know who the Negroes are and see how they gang up, it will be very easy for you to understand what we're saying. And the best way to understand it is to look for these materials and study them yourself. Very simple. When you study them, you will begin to understand when you are being lied to. It makes you biscuit-headed if you just listen to what the slave master is telling you, knowing that the slave master is confirmed a liar. So from the same book, we see that Lagos became a great slaving port about the year 1815, when the king of Benin and a few other chiefs refused to allow slaves to be exported from their territories. The original inhabitants of Lagos were a mixture of Bini and Yoruba people. When it became a port of export for slaves, such slaves as became residents as laborers and servants of the slave dealers and merchants added their quota to the population, and when after 1861 it became a British colony, many free slaves from Sierra Leone and other parts, more especially Brazil, made their homes there. So you understand how Lagos came to be. Remember that during the slave trade, everybody was on the run. When the Arabs or Fulanis were advancing, people ran away, leaving their homes and all that. So this was how everywhere was until people started coming out because the slave trade had stopped. So this should tell you what was going on. And remember, there is no way the king of Benin will be stopping slaves from passing through his territory if the slaves were coming from the same locale. Look at it, look at the logic very well, because they destroyed the entire place. So what the slave masters normally did at that time would be they will either raid the town and or kill the king or depose him or send him on exile and accuse him of something. It is the same script you see their allies play today in places like Nigeria. If you don't agree with what they say, they accuse you of corruption, produce a list of houses all over the world and present to the gullible public. That's what they do. None of those things you see are true. So that's all they do. If you doubt what we're saying, all you need to do is to do just basic primary school research. That's all you need to do, and you will discover what we're telling you. So, but let us move forward. So let us reference a book called Slavery and the Slave Trade in Africa by Henry M. Stanley, and it was published in 1893, and we see the following. The slave traders admit they have only 2,300 captives in their fold. The banks of the river prove that 118 villages and 43 tribal districts have been devastated, out of which they have only this scant profit of 2,300 females and children and about 2,000 tusks of ivory. Given that these 118 villages contained only 118,000 people, we have only a profit of 2%, and by the time all these captives have been subjected to the accidents of the long river voyage before them, of camp life and its harsh miseries, to the havoc of smallpox and the pest which misery breeds, there will only remain a scant 1% upon the bloody ventures. Now, our challenge to you is, if these number of villages were being destroyed, how do you believe that the slaves being sold at Edmina or Cape Coast castles are from that same immediate locale? It's not possible, because they would have destroyed everything there. And you notice that they are pushing towards the so-called Bight of Biafra and Benin at the moment. And remember, those are the only places they don't have slave posts. They don't even mention it. The reason you don't hear them mention Biafra or anything, or Ambazonia, even Trump and all their hypocrisy in the United Nations, in the AU, or even mention the killings in the Middle Belt, is because it is the same game they are playing. The same game, the same people, the same technique. So now that you understand a bit of what we're trying to say, if you can find the materials and study them, you will get exactly what we're talking about, because there is no way we can change an age-long lie in a 15 or 20 or 30-minute video. The important thing is that the scholars, if you can do your basic research, you will understand what we're saying. And remember, the professors do not read to understand. They read to N11, and most of them are controlled. If you are not controlled, if you look at Professor Gates, for example, he will have these books, but you won't hear him mention any of those things, because he has been told what to say and what not to say. And that is the game they play. You can pause the video and read the opposite page, but our interest here is how the slave masters got the contract to supply slaves. So you see where it tells us that 165 years after the discovery of the Cape, Sir John Hawkins pioneers the way for England to participate in the slave trade, hitherto carried on by the Portuguese and Spanish and the Dutch. A century later, a king of England, Charles II, heads an English company which undertakes to supply the British West Indies yearly with 30,000 Negroes. Now you see, 30,000 Negroes is not the same as 30,000 Africans. Semantics will make them look like the same, but they have a target. For example, if they sell only Negroes, it makes sense to talk about only Negroes. So they're not going to come and say, oh, 30,000 Africans, because the slaves were not expected from everywhere. They even had a place where they wrote that the Negroids were not very intelligent. They didn't need those ones. But having seen what we're saying, if you go further down, you will see where it tells us that after the Asiento contract, under which for 30 years England secured the monopoly of supplying the Spanish West Indies with slaves, as many as 192 ships were engaged every year in the transportation of slaves from the African coast. The countries which suffered most from the superior British method of slave capturing and trading and slave carrying were Congoland, the Niger Valley, the Guinea, the Gold Coast, the Gambia, Cross and Calabar lands. So Cross and Calabar lands, you know where those are today. So have you wondered why no one mentions them in anything, including the slave ports? They keep quiet about them because they know what they are doing and what they had done. So now our challenge to you will be, if they had 192 ships and they had a superior method of slave capturing, where does your chief come in? If they have to capture, remember I didn't say slave management or anything, he said capturing. Capturing is the word there. So if they have a way of capturing, where does your chief that you are made to believe captured the slaves, where does he come in? So how does he do his own capture? Or does he capture and the British also capture? But the contract of 30,000 Negroes yearly is won by the British. So where is his own contract? So the reason they tell you, oh no, the Negroes sold themselves, the African kings make wars, is the semantics is just to make it look like the Negroes were animals. They didn't move. If you bring them and keep them like cattle, they just stay there. Because there is no way you can demonstrate to any sensible person how any person with bows and arrows can capture 3,000 or 4,000 slaves. It's impossible with the people running away. Because even with a poison arrow, as they call it, you can only shoot once. There's no magic. So how can you capture 3,000 people with bows and arrows? So if you think they gave them guns, it's a lie. If you read the materials, you will see that it is not true either. The only reason those narratives are surviving today is because most of the scholars are controlled, and an average Negro reads to pass his exams. He doesn't read to know what could have happened. So let us also reference the Asiento contract itself. So on your screen, you see the Asiento or contract for allowing to the subjects of Great Britain the liberty of importing Negroes into the Spanish America. Remember, they are calling them Negroes right here. Signed by the Catholic King at Madrid, the 26th day of March 1713. So London, and printed by whoever in 1713. But the important thing you see is, you see that the same people that you claim stopped the slave trade and brought you a God that you never knew are the same people that were behind it. So this is their contract, which you can see yourself. So the important thing is for you to go look for it and read it too. So you see that he's saying the same thing that the book of 1890 something is saying as well. This is 1713. So we see where he tells us on the right, because he has both Spanish and English both side by side. It says, "Whereas the Asiento agreed on with the Royal Guinea Company, settled in France for the introducing of Negro slaves into the Indies is determined, and the Queen of Great Britain, being desirous of coming into this commerce, and in her name the English company, as is stipulated in the preliminaries of the peace, our interest here is Negro slaves. So it is Negro slaves. So when you hear Africans today, it is just semantics. That's the game they are playing. So you need to understand what they are doing. Here again, as still part of the contract, you see where it says that the ships which shall be employed by this Asianto may sail from ports of Great Britain, Spain, at the choice of the Asiantes, who shall give an account to his Catholic Majesty of what ships they shall dispatch yearly for the Negro trade. So the important thing and our interest here is the Negro trade. So it even goes further down, you can read it yourself, but our interest is the Negro trade. So you understand why they are hell-bent on African, and for you to understand why their allies still support them against the Negroes. So if you look at things like Biafra and Ambazonia, you will see that the United Nations, the AU, do not talk about them. And you look at the number of people being murdered in the middle belt of Nigeria today by the Fulanis, they don't talk about them. It's not because they don't know. It's not because they don't hear. It's because it's part of their plan. This is well planned. It's the same thing they did then. So the important thing is when they are done, they will turn it around. If you notice, after the killings, while the Fulanis will occupy the place evacuated by those running away, they will come and arrest some innocent people and take them to court and bribe the judge to say it is them that are doing the killing. You notice that those that are occupying the people's villages are no longer the guilty party. It is those people that they capture, because the European court system is just an extension of the slave trade. It is never law. It is never justice. So that is where they can control. So all they need to do is, if you are targeted or if they want to do anything, they do it and come and catch you and say you did it. Then tell the judge to rule that it was you that did it. So their newspapers will carry that you did it. So everywhere it will be you did it. You will be in prison. Remember, these same people that didn't have human heart to capture people and put in jail, capture people and put in slave caravans and match them and kill them, pregnant women, anybody. They don't have human hearts. Sorry, that's the truth about it. Even the slave masters wrote it themselves, which we can show you where they wrote it. So they do not have the heart of human. You might be laughing and cheering because you don't feel the pain of those they are destroying today, but that's still what they are doing. At least if you can see these contracts and see how much lies they've told you, you will be able to know that there is no way they can be telling you the truth in much of whatever they do with you. So here you see the concluding part of the contract, and it says, Your Majesty does hereby approve and ratify the Asianto adjusted with the Company of England for the importation of Negro slaves into the Indies for the term of 30 years in the manner mentioned in the articles above inserted. So our interest is Negro slaves. So you see that it is Negro slaves. Slavery didn't get to places like South Africa, Somalia, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, our modern Ethiopia, and all those places. So when you are talking about the slave trade, it's just all about Negroes. So anyone you see telling you African is just a biscuit-headed folk. He doesn't know what he's talking about or buying into the slave master's narrative. So back to the book we referenced earlier, it told us how the slaves were acquired. It says they landed at night, surrounded the selected village, and then set fire to the huts. And as the frightened people issued out of the burning houses, they were seized and carried to the ships. Or sometimes the skipper, in his hurry for sea, sent his crew to range through the town he was trading with, and regardless of rank, to seize upon every man, woman, and child they met. Old Town, Creek Town, and Duke Town in Old Calabar have often witnessed this summary and high-handed proceeding. So now you see how they got the slaves. So when they tell you African chiefs or Africans sold other Africans, you should be able to understand that a liar is a liar. No matter how much you embellish a lie remains a lie. Remember, a lie is still a lie even if everyone believes it. And the truth is still the truth even if no one believes it. You have to bear that in mind. But now our interest is, you look on your right, you see where it tells us about what they did when they freed the slaves. You will see that their allies in sub-Saharan Africa did the same thing. So from the opposite page, you will see where it tells us or gives us an idea of what happened in less than 100 years between 1777 to 1807. We see that upwards of 3 million Africans had been sold in the West Indies. All those forts which may be seen lining the west coast of Africa today were constructed principally by means of the revenue derived from the slave tax. But then, here is our interest. In 1833, slavery was abolished throughout the British dominions, and the government agreed to pay the slave owners of the West Indies 20 million redemption money. That's 20 million pounds for 1 million of slaves. On the 1st of August 1834, the famous Act of Emancipation came into operation. Throughout the West Indies, the eve of the great day was kept by watch meetings in acclamation of praise and thanksgiving. It is said that when the hour of midnight began to strike, the singing and shouting ceased and the congregation knelt, whatever they are saying. But our interest is, you notice that the slave owners were paid, not the slaves. So you will see the same thing play out also in the slave masters' allies in sub-Saharan Africa. This will tell you who did. So let us reference A Tropical Dependency, an outline of the ancient history of the Western Sudan by Flora L. Shaw, Lady Lugard, and it was published in 1905. We see the following. The expedition returned on this occasion after 2 months to Borno, and when the total gains were reckoned up, they were found to amount to something over 3,000 slaves and 10,000 head of cattle. Now we challenge you to tell us how an African chief, that is without a standing army, can gather 3,000 people. That's 3,000 human beings. However you want to look at it, even if it's kids, 3,000. And then it's also went further to say, and 10,000 head of cattle. The slaves consisted almost entirely of women and young persons, mostly children, and the slaughter of full-grown males was said to have amounted to no more than 300, or 1 in 10. The great majority of full-grown males had therefore escaped, as had the more active of the full-grown young women. Of the 3,000 taken, the commander-in-chief claimed 1/3. So does your local chief that was said to be the one selling the slaves have a commander-in-chief? If he does, then he must have an army. Then if he doesn't have an army, then he can be. So you see how it is. We have to apply deductive reasoning here. So if you go further, you see where it says there remained 2,000 slaves and about 7,000 head of cattle to divide between the 20,000 persons who had composed the expedition. That is to say that if the spoil was evenly divided, each man would receive the 10th part of a slave and the 3rd part of a bullock as his individual share. That such waste of life, destruction of property, and loss of time could be considered, even from the purely practical point of view, to be compensated by such poor results is indication enough of how little all these things are valued among races where practices of this kind are countenanced. So you see why you have to understand what we're talking about here. Just get the books and study them yourself. I have quoted the account of this raid at some length, for as it happened to be accompanied by 2 trustworthy Europeans, the details may be accepted as correct, and the incidents, though varying no doubt on every occasion, are typical enough to illustrate vividly the absolute incompatibility of slave raiding with the maintenance of civilized government in the country raided. So you see it. So there is no way the places where they are capturing the slaves could be where the forts are, because if you destroy a community capturing everybody, you can't come back there the next day because there will be nobody there. So you see some of the reasons why they keep singing and dancing African, African, why they will pay the likes of Professor Gates and all those descendants of former slaves in the US to help them sing African, African, African American. So you see why they found it very easy to adopt it. You see the case of Carter G. Woodson, who was a Negro author. The Negro Journal was written by him. So they pretended to, as if to honor him, they changed the school to African American Studies. So while they are working to obliterate the Negro identity, the Negroes do not even know this. Or well, many know, it's just that people don't talk about it. But those in Sub-Saharan Africa know. While the other group called the so-called Hebrew Israelites are busy claiming to be Israelites or whatever they say they are. The question should be, they should be able to read their history and come up with an informed opinion that should make sense to everybody and be real, true, based on the truth, and not claiming something written by somebody they don't know in a language they don't know, they never spoke. But let us round up by looking at one or two other things. Let us reference a description of the coasts of North and South Guinea and of Ethiopia Inferior, vulgarly Angola. Bring a new and accurate account of the western maritime countries of Africa in 6 books, whatever, by John Barbot, and it was published in 1732. And then we reference another material called A Description of the Coast of Nigritia, vulgarly called North Guinea. So our interest is where it's saying vulgarly this, vulgarly that. So it is highly likely that those countries are not where or what they were called many years ago. So we need to start to understand why these changes were made. But let us see what is contained inside the books. So here we see betwixt Guinea and Congo are several territories which some ancient authors comprehended together with Guinea proper in Nigritia, but the modern, with more reason, account them all as part of Ethiopia exterior. Generally, those countries are subdivided into 3 parts, visibly the kingdoms of Biafra, Gabon, Cape Lope Gonzales as the chiefest or whatever, and extending from north to south their coasts with those of Aweri, Calabar and Del Rey, forming the Gulf of Guinea by the ancients called Ethiopiacus Sinus Intimus, and now by the English mariners the Bight of Guinea, which later became Bight of Biafra and all that. So but our interest here is the people you expected would have combined to stop the slave trade. Are they not the same people killing people over this Biafra you are reading about here now? You just need to mention it. It was destroyed by the slave trade. But just mentioning it, the same people will kill you. That's what those people you call, because like the slave master said, they are not very intelligent. They do not have brains. So the slave master knows them for having that weakness. So all they do is to provide them with the weapons and hide behind them to be doing whatever they were doing then. Still the same thing. Because if, let's give you an example. If the Fulani came to say they wanted a particular, there are a lot of unoccupied places in sub-Saharan Africa they could have. If they wanted to build any civilization, they could have. Everybody will be happy for them to have it and for there to be peace. But they will never want that. And that's the problem. So now, you see, the same people, if you say, oh, we want independence, they will kill you. If you say we need jobs, you remember the president that said people were lazy. If you say you need jobs, you needed jobs, and you are not, you are like supposedly a Negro in that place, you are already marked for death, or they will accuse you of one corruption or something. If you even build a company that is like they have a motor company there, they want to kill it as well, because the slave master will come and hide behind them, produce one documentary or tell them one thing. Imagine a people that you are in a country, and let's say you build a manufacturing facility. The slave master will come and whisper to them that, look, oh, they are developing more than you. They will develop and start killing you. Then they will close that company. That's all they do. So the slave master gives them guns, and that's all. So you see, the same country they are killing people for over self-determination. You see it here, written here. It's been in history. It was desolated by them if you were to go read the materials. But in conclusion, let us look at what they do with them. Remember, our apologies anyway, we were supposed to tell you how the slave master's allies also compensated only the slave owners in sub-Saharan Africa, the same way the slave masters compensated the slave owners in their own place. Because normally we try to show you why it was impossible for Africans to have come together to also stop the slave trade. Again, remember, people like the king of Benin, who refused slaves passing through his own territory, are people we should be celebrating. But unfortunately, the slave master will not teach you that in his class. That's why they keep singing the Africans so that Africans, so that you won't know that there are some noble men, and you won't also know where they got the slaves from. Those are two things. Because remember, for the king to refuse taking slaves from, that is, slaves passing through their kingdom, it means the slaves come from somewhere and then pass through somewhere. So remember what we told you. You can do your own research. But let us see what Flora Shaw said in her own book about how the slave owners will be were compensated in sub-Saharan Africa. You see where it says, the position of the Fulani chiefs was, however, in the first instance, profoundly modified by a condition which was of the very essence of British administration. A large part of their revenue had consisted of tribute paid in slaves, and in some cases of the tithe levied on the produce of slave raids, which they conducted either in person or by the medium of the commander of their troops. So you see why when you hear some descendants of former slaves say some African chiefs were against stopping the slave trade, you will notice that they don't know where the chiefs are from. All they know is African, because they see Africa as one small village, less than a town, in fact a very small tiny village, where there will be some chiefs coming together. They don't know that even Africa is bigger than Europe. So they don't know that, because the best way to hide something from a black man is actually to put it down in a book. However, our interest here is where it says further down that property in slaves, whatever may be thought of it by the enlightened conscience of Europe, is as real to the Mohammedan, that's Muslims, as any other form of property. Slavery is an institution sanctioned by the law of Islam, and to abolish it without compensation to the Mohammedan slave owners would be an act of injustice amounting to nothing less than wholesale confiscation. So you see that the colonial officer, the wife, writing here in 1905, is saying that the Mohammedan slave owners must be compensated, and it will be injustice not to. Now remember, the slaves whose lives and everything were destroyed, nothing is talked about them till today, and they are still doing their game. So now our question to you is, how could you have expected that these people can ever come together with the Negroes to stop the slave trade? They couldn't have, and they can't, because they are even worse than the Europeans. That's the truth. They are worse than the Europeans. Today, if you mention Biafra, we read about Biafra some minutes ago, they're going to kill you. See what is happening in Biafra and Ambazonia. Those are where the slaves were from. Remember, for the king of Benin to refuse slaves passing through his territory, that should tell you that the slaves are not coming from within his territory. And if you remember, we told you that Elmina Castle, Cape Coast Castle were just slave holding facilities. That's not where the slaves come from. And when you begin to understand where they get the slaves from, you will be able to see the gang up today. They are doing the same thing. If you notice the killings in the Middle Belt, for example, goes unnoticed. They know that they keep talking, they keep doing what they are doing. The only thing the Negroes, or yes, Negroes will do is just to talk, which is what you see. So, which is most unfortunate though, but let us round up with just the last part of what we're talking about. So we see from the last two books we referenced where it says A Voyage to New Calabar, an abstract of a voyage to New Calabar River or Rio Real in the year 1699. But our interest is further down where it says trade of other Europeans, and to that effect we are very ready to assist upon all occasions the blacks, their allies, that they might beat their enemies. So this should tell you how they channel the guns, the weapons, the firearms, who they give them to. And that is why it is impossible for the Africans to think of coming together or to have thought of coming together at that time. Remember, no radio, no TV, no road, no cars to stop the slave trade. As far as there are such people there is going to be violence, there's going to be poverty, there's going to be subjugation and slavery, because that's who they are. Remember, you can't say you need a job and they won't start killing you with the weapons they have been provided with by the slave masters. You can't say they should rebuild your schools and they don't kill you. That is why we challenge you to go and look at Biafra and Ambazonia. Find time to look at those two places. Ask questions about what is going on. Find out why the rest of the region, the AU, they keep quiet about those things, why the massacres are going on. Look at the middle belt of Nigeria and find out what is going on there. Remember, yes, people may not be daft, people may be biscuit-headed, they might not even know, but humanity to others is very important. The globe, the earth is very big. We can all be peaceful and live together in harmony, in peace and in love. So why do people kill the others? Just ask yourself this little question. Why will a country that claims to be a country somebody should live in be killing its own people just because they said, oh, we want freedom, build our roads, build our schools? So when you are living with such people in the same space, that should tell you how impossible it could have been for the Africans to have come together to stop the slave trade. We thank you very much for listening, and we do hope you will find time to conduct your own research. Our interest is humanity to others, that we show love to everybody, that people should stop killing the others. Remember, those that incite others to kill others are equally culpable, because those people that are killing people, they lack the wisdom. Their brains are not as advanced as those that are inciting them. This is written very well by the slave masters themselves, so they know the mental weakness of the people killing others over nothing. So you understand where we are coming from. We do hope you will find time to look for these materials, study them yourself. Don't depend on what they teach you in class, because those are based on curriculum drawn by the slave masters, because they wouldn't want you to know anything good about who you are or anything heroic about your forebears. All they are interested in telling you is how they sold their brothers and siblings, which you already know is not true. We thank you once again very much for listening. Peace.